The first round of the 2024 Fantasy Football Playoffs was complete pandemonium. As we await the outcome of Monday Night Football in Week 15, there have been some shocking developments. Quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers, Mac Jones, and Cooper Rush found themselves unexpectedly inside the top 10. At the same time, high-profile names like Kyler Murray, Matthew Stafford, Tua Tagovailoa, and Brock Purdy finished outside the top 20. It's been a roller coaster ride at the quarterback position. Big names like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, and David Montgomery ranked outside the top 25 at running back. But if you took a shot on Tyjae Spears, you're likely feeling pretty good about your chances in your consolation bracket. The wide receiver position wasn't much better, as stars like Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, and Marvin Harrison Jr. failed to crack 5 half PPR points. As for me, I caught the same number of passes as Cooper Kupp. It's been that kind of year. And of course, the tight end did its usual thing. Brenton Strange, Foster Moreau, Chig Okonkwo, and Adam Troutman all finished as T1s. The chaos never ends. Looking ahead to Week 16, here's a breakdown of the risers and fallers as we prepare for the second round of the fantasy playoffs. Remember, fantasy rankings can fluctuate rapidly as the week progresses, so check back on Sunday morning for final updates. Week 16 Fantasy Football Quarterback Rankings. Risers and fallers. Up, Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield has been one of the surprises of the season. He's currently the QB5 overall, and has finished in the top 10 in 11-15 games. For comparison, that's as many top 10 finishes as Josh Allen and more than Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow. Mayfield now faces a Cowboys defense that's allowed 7 quarterbacks to score 20-plus fantasy points against them. This could be another big week for Mayfield. Up, Caleb Williams. The rookie sensation is now Fantasy's QB8 since the Bears fired offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. This includes a QB5 finish in Week 12 against the Lions. Williams should be a solid streaming option in Week 16 against a Detroit defense decimated by injuries this season. He's a great player in deeper leagues. Up, Anthony Richardson. While his passing numbers leave much to be desired, Anthony Richardson's rushing ability makes him a strong fantasy option. Since regaining the starting role in Week 11, Richardson has provided solid fantasy floors, even with low passing numbers. He faces a Titans defense in Week 16 that's allowed at least 17.7 points to 7 of the last 9 quarterbacks they've faced. Richardson should be a QB1 this week. Down, Jared Goff. Jared Goff's home/road splits are well documented, and things don't look great with a tough matchup on the road against the Bears. In 3 starts at Soldier Field since 2021, Goff has finished as the QB23, QB22, and QB25. You may want to look elsewhere this week if you have better options. Down, Justin Herbert. Herbert started hot, but his production has dropped significantly over the last 3 weeks. After 5 straight QB1 finishes, he's posted ranks of QB30, QB19, and QB17 in his previous 3 games. With a tough matchup against the Broncos in Week 16, Herbert is a risky option this week. Down, C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud has struggled over the past several weeks, finishing as the QB14 or lower in 9 of his last 10 games. The Texans faced the Chiefs in Week 16, and only 2 quarterbacks have scored 20-plus fantasy points against Kansas City since Week 1. Stroud is not a reliable streaming option this week. Week 16 Fantasy Football Running Back Rankings. Risers and fallers. Up, Bucky Irving. Despite a rough Week 14, Bucky Irving has been one of the top fantasy backs in recent weeks. The rookie has been putting up solid performances, and will now face a Cowboys defense that's allowed the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. Irving is a great pick this week if you need a solid RB2 or flex option. Up, Jerome Ford. With Nick Chubb now out for the season due to a broken foot, Jerome Ford is firmly in the RB2 conversation. Ford had an excellent game against Kansas City, and now faces a Bengals defense that's allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs over their last 4 games. Ford could be in for another big week. Up, Kendre Miller. Kendre Miller stepped into a workhorse role after Alvin Kamara suffered a groin injury in Week 15. If Kamara can't go in Week 16, Miller will be an RB2 option against the Packers. The downside is that the game is on Monday Night Football, and we might not know Kamara's status until game time, which makes Miller a bit of a risk. Down, Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor has been a major disappointment this season. He hasn't finished higher than RB4 in any game, and has been outside the top 20 running backs in 4 of his last 6 games. With the Colts' offensive struggles continuing, it's hard to trust Taylor as a top-tier option in Week 16. Down, Isaiah Pacheco. Since returning from injury, Isaiah Pacheco hasn't looked as explosive, with fantasy finishes of RB47, RB31, and RB34 in his last 3 games. Pacheco could struggle to produce with a tough matchup against the Texans, who have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. Week 16 Fantasy Football Wide Receiver Rankings. Risers and Fallers. Up, Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton has been hot lately, and he could explode in Week 16 against the Chargers. Since Week 9, only the Falcons have been more generous to wide receivers than Los Angeles. Sutton is in a prime position to continue his strong fantasy run this week. Up, Brian Thomas Jr. The rookie has been on fire since Jacksonville's bye, with 10, 12, and 14 targets in his last 3 games. He's finished as a WR2 or better in all of them. With a favorable matchup against the Raiders, who are struggling defensively, Thomas should be a solid flex or WR3 play in Week 16. Up, Romeo Dew. After 2 touchdowns against the Seahawks, Romeo Dew has been solid in recent weeks. He has finished as a top 15 wideout in half PPR formats in 3 of his last 6 fully healthy games. With the Saints allowing the 5th most fantasy points to receivers this season, Dew is a strong streaming option for Week 16. Up, Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan has been a surprise fantasy asset, with 13 targets over his last 2 games and 3 touchdowns during that stretch. Against a vulnerable Cowboys defense, McMillan is a great streaming option and could be a solid flex play for Week 16. Down, DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf has recently struggled, ranking as the WR28 or worse in 8 of his last 9 outings since Week 4. With Geno Smith's status in question for Week 16, Metcalf could face another tough week, even with a seemingly favorable matchup. Down, Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers started the season strong, but has cooled off considerably. He's ranked as the WR31 or lower in 5 consecutive games, and a tough matchup against the Steelers doesn't help. Flowers is a risky start for Week 16. Week 16 Fantasy Football Tight End Rankings. Risers and Fallers. Up, Brenton Strange. With injuries affecting Jacksonville's tight end group, Brenton Strange has stepped up, receiving 12 targets in Week 15 against the Jets. The Raiders have been generous to tight ends, allowing 20.1 fantasy points per game, so Strange could continue to see heavy usage in Week 16. Up, Noah Gray. Noah Gray has been a hidden gem since Week 11, ranking as the T4. He has 4 red zone touchdowns in that span, which ties him for the most among all pass catchers. With the Texans allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends since Week 10, Gray is an excellent option for those streaming tight ends. Down, Cade Otton. Cade Otton's role has been diminished with Mike Evans' return and Jalen McMillan's emergence in Tampa Bay's offense. Since the team's Week 11 bye, Otten has been the T21 in half PPR formats. If you're relying on Otten, it might be time to look for alternatives in Week 16. Week 16 is upon us, and the fantasy football playoffs are heating up. Every decision counts, so make sure you're staying on top of the latest rankings and news. Best of luck, and check back for more updates as we get closer to Sunday.